I'm Erik Morgansen. This is my shot breakdown. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to deal with the mechanics of a character that's falling to the ground. We're going to look at a shot from the second Transformers movie, and I like this as an example for this sort of shot for a couple of reasons. One, this is a big, heavy character, and two, it's in slow motion, so we can see a lot of the details more clearly. The first thing I need to do with this shot was to find out what was going on with the camera. We can see here that instead of just tilting down as this character falls to the ground, we've got a Dutch move that's happening as well. So there's a twist that happens within the camera move that follows it down. You can see how this rotates around back this way, like that. And then I can see generally where my contact point is going to need to happen here. And then the camera keeps tilting. It keeps tilting this way, and we find our actor here that we want to feature in the frame along with our hero that's just fallen to the ground here. So I've got to feature the action of this heavy fall happening and make sure it's staged to the camera in a way where we can see it here and also see our actor. So I know I've got to keep this guy's face pointing mostly to the camera, and I want to keep him in camera as much as possible. So the other thing you'll notice when we look at this that I mentioned before is that this camera's moving in slow motion. We can see in the background plate everything's moving slowly, and we need to match that in our timing because it turns out this is moving just less than half speed. So that's important for our timing, but that's also important to take into account the fact that that's going to cause all the things that we see in the action of our character to be revealed in a really detailed way. There's not a lot of places to hide things when things are moving slowly. We're going to see all the details and that kind of thing. And as we look at this, it looks pretty chaotic. There's a lot going on. There's panels of this character bouncing around. There's things moving against the force of the action of the character, falling to the ground and then moving against gravity. So there's a lot of this residual motion that's just shifting all around the character, and there's parts of the character that are coming into contact with the ground and with other parts of the character all throughout the shot. So it looks like this big chaotic mess. So how do we arrive at this kind of animation? How do we organize all of the different movements that we need to do in a way that's manageable? And for me, the answer to that is always to work big to small. So I'm going to start with the major movements first and then work down to the details. This is a simplified version of the character that we see in the shot, and I've removed the camera movement and all of the details here. It's just a very simple version. So this allows us to see what's going on here a little bit easier. So as I'm thinking about this and thinking about working big to small, one of the main things I want to consider is this idea of reversals in the spine. So when I'm thinking about simplifying things, the spine is the first place I'm going to begin. So I'm going to consider the hip, chest, and the head, and the masses of each, but I want to get these things figured out and the connection between them. So I'm going to start in thinking about my contact point with the ground, and that's here. And what I want to do is, because I know that the character is going to be laying down like this at the end, I know I want him staged this way so that he fits in nicely with the live action character that's going to be here in the frame. I know I got to end up here, and so I want to create some dynamic action to get me there. I want this to feel violent so that when it lays down, it's going in an opposite direction with the spine. So what I want to do is I'm starting out with a line of action in the spine roughly like this. So we're leaned over a little bit like this at the top, and then I'm going to reverse it through here. So when we get to our contact point, we've now reversed the spine in a pretty dramatic way. So when we contact here, now I can do a reversal again, and that's what I'm doing here. So I've got now this shape of the spine. So I'm going from what we had here, like this, with this contact, and now I'm reversing it. And I know that I'll get some nice dynamic action if I do that. And then from there, because this is a big, heavy character, I'm not going to do then another large reversal the other way. I could do this, if this was a lighter character or a really elastic kind of character, I could do a reversal that's almost to the same degree that this one is. So I could have at this moment the spine reversed even more so that my character is, the hips are up higher and the legs are down like this and the head is down like that. But I'm not going to do that here. This is a big heavy character, and so I really want to keep it feeling like it's landing and then all of its weight is holding it to the ground. The one thing I do want to have is a sense of residual motion, because just like with all large things, they take longer to begin moving, but they take longer to stop moving as well. And so this reverberation of residual motion to the spine, I want it to keep going all the way to the end. So what we end up with is this bounce that diminishes as we go, but it continues on through the end of the shot. So now that I have the spine figured out, I know the next thing I want to do is think about what's happening with the extremities of the body. So the one that's going to be most important is this arm that's actually making contact with the ground before the hip a little bit. So here, this wrist and hand are going to contact, and then the elbow is going to turn out. I'm just going to let this slide out this way, and then I'm going to kind of treat this arm like it's kind of just died here. It's going to intersect the ground plane and kind of stick in the ground. It's going to bounce a little bit through here, and I'll give it a little bit of overlap on the elbow and the wrist. They're going to do a little bit of a whipping motion through there, just slightly, but for the most part it's going to stick on the ground there and kind of die. So that's the first thing that I'm going to treat, and it does rely, after it makes contact with the ground, then it does rely on the motion of the hip and the chest. It's going to get pulled and pushed by these things as they go up and down. So I'm going to figure that part out first, then I'm going to go in and do the legs, the next most important thing in working big to smalls. I want to figure out how, when this contact point happens here, what happens with the leg. So now the hip is going to hit, and then this knee is going to come down, make contact. It's going to bounce back up, back down. The ankle is going to make contact within, right about here. So now I've got this bouncing action that happens in the leg as well as that leg that's going to contact the ground. So I've got all of this stuff that's kind of in this area intersecting with the ground plane figured out. And then I've got these other limbs over here. They're secondary to those because they don't make contact with the ground, but they are going to make contact with the rest of the body. So here now I'm dragging this leg up kind of in an arc like that, and then it's going to drag a little higher and then make contact with an ankle first, and then with a knee, and then going to bounce a little bit along that other leg, and then the residual motion is going to start to fade out in this limb as well. But for the most part, I'm treating this leg like the ground plane for this one over here. So it's going to make contact like that. This arm over here, I'm just going to let it make contact in, or kind of around where the bicep of the character is, around where the lat of on the side of the body is, and I'm just going to let the rest of the arm hang kind of dead, but it is going to make contact and bounce against the side of the body here, and I want to have that so it doesn't feel too simplistic. So now that I've started to look at how I'm going to treat the bending of the joints of the character, in this case with the spine and then the extremities, I want to now start thinking about how I'm going to deal with the contact points of the character on the ground. The two things are very interrelated, obviously, but I want to get into more of the details of these and find out how I'm going to manage those things. So I want to go back and I'm going to do the spine first, in this case the hip that's going to make contact first, and then move on from there. So again, I want to simplify this as much as I possibly can. Now with the hip, it's a three-dimensionally moving part of the character, right? We've got the 6 axes of movement, 3 of translation, and 3 of rotation. And I want to make sure that I'm considering all those things, but almost always there's a dominant one. And in this case, for what I'm doing, the dominant one is this rotation that's taking us counterclockwise here, like this. And then after the contact point happens, then it's going to rotate the opposite way here, and I'm going to invert it to get the change in line of action of the spine. I'm going to get my reversal. So this is the major axis of rotation, is around this way. So I'm going to treat that one first and make sure that that one looks good. And then the next one I want to consider is this axis that goes along the length of the spine, because what I need to have happen at the end of the shot is to end up here where my character is staged in a way where we can still see his face, and we can see him pointed and open to the camera, and we can see the actor that's down below in the screen. So I knew I need to end up roughly here. So I don't want to end up with the character on his back. I need him to be rolled over this way. So I want to have him land flat like this, and then roll back at the end towards camera. But again, trying to create a dynamic motion, I want to have a reversal there as well. So what I'm going to have happen is him roll away like this. He's going to roll back this direction a little bit, and then here forward this way again. So I've got that rotational axis there. And then the third one is going to be this pivot that happens along this way, where he's going to kind of rotate away from the camera, but I don't want him to do that too much because I don't want him to be too foreshortened to the camera at the end. So those are my axes of rotation on the hips. And then my translational motion is going to just be falling down and then a bounce up and down and up and down. And then a little bit of a bounce in here like that. And that's by far the major one. There's a little bit of movement forward and back, but not much because I'm going to be locked to this space where the hip is impacted with the ground. And then forward and back a little bit there because the action of the character falling from screen left to right is going to create a little bit of dynamic motion in that direction. So he's going to slide a little bit, but mostly he's going to get stuck on the ground though because it's heavy, kind of muddy ground, and he's just going to get stuck. So those are the main things I need to consider with the hip, and then the chest is going to follow behind that. So I've got my contacts that happen here with the ground, and you can see them with these cones that I've got indicated on the ground there. That's going to be the first thing, and now I've got my reversal, and now the chest and the rib cage start to take some of that weight in that reversal, and then the top of the shoulder. And the chest again, and then we reverse again, and now the hip is making contact down here, and then a little bit of reversal, and then now reverse again, hip again, chest again. So we're just doing a back and forth between hip and chest, and that's how that bounce is happening, and that's helping me to create a reversal in the spine. And then from there I'm going to deal with the extremities of the body. So I'm going to start with this arm that makes contact with the ground first. And again, I'm indicating the contact points with these cones. I'm going to start with the elbow, the wrist, and then elbow. That's going to slide out. Now I've got elbow and shoulder. The whole thing lifts up, shoulder, elbow, wrist. So I'm going to reverse it. So it becomes kind of like a whipping action through the arm. And then I'm going to let it just kind of die and hang on the ground here at this point. Make a couple of little contacts as the body bounces. But I'm going to treat it as though the body has put all its weight on this arm and it's kind of pinned underneath. And then from there I'm going to deal with the legs. So the next most important part, they have more weight than the arms. I want to do this arm first that makes contact with the ground. But now let's get into the legs. So this moment here where the knee touches is going to be driven by the contact with the hips. I want it to follow slightly behind, and then I want it to feel dynamic enough so that it feels like the hip motion landing against the ground is causing a whipping action that pulls the knee down. So that starts the timing of this leg, and then I'm going to have everything else just based on that timing of when the knee comes down. I'm going to do a reversal here where the knee comes back up, then I'm going to have the heel come down, then the knee, then the toe, and I'm going to do a similar kind of whipping action that I did with the arm there, where it just reverberates through knee, ankle, toe, knee, ankle, toe. Knee, ankle, toe. Same way. And I'm going to time that to correspond with the bouncing that's in the body and be behind it a bit, so it feels like it's keeping with the feeling that the hip drove that action and it doesn't ever quite catch up. It's not quite as heavy as the body, and it's going to feel like it's a little bit behind. And then the other leg is going to be driven, the upper leg is going to be driven by its contact. Heel first, then toe, then heel and toe. The knee never makes contact. It just shakes up and down relative to those two and has some bounce in it as well. And then I have the opposite arm, and this one I'm just having it bounce against the side of the body here. So it makes contact there, bounces. The elbow is going to drag behind a bit, bounce, bounce, and it continues until its motion starts to dissipate. In a similar way, but it's following behind the chest and just making a contact point here with the side of the body. One more thing that I should mention is the head of the character. I didn't talk about that when we did the spine because it doesn't make contact with the ground, and this is also a special case because this character has been knocked unconscious. I want the head to drag a lot more than it might if this character was alert and trying not to fall down or trying to hold himself up. So I let the head drag pretty dramatically in through here and then do a strong reversal there. And so it has the same 6 axes of motion that the hip does. I'm going to have it translate up and down, forward and back, and then it's also going to rotate on all 3 axes as well. And I want it to drag a little bit more and hang more at the end so it feels like my character's either drowsy or disoriented or something like that. Doing a shot like this, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the complexity of all the places where the character needs to contact with the ground. And it can become tempting just to do something simple and avoid all of those things. But ultimately what you often end up with is something that looks overly simplistic. So you can get the best of both worlds by being really clear about your planning, make sure you know where the character needs to be staged to the camera, thinking about the spine first and the major masses of the body, and then working your way down the chain from there and making sure that contact points with the ground or with the body, those things get planned out properly and they're driven by the force of the action of the character hitting the ground and then those things reverberating through the body. And if you do that stuff, then you get a shot that looks nice and complex, but it's manageable. That's my shot breakdown. Thanks for watching.